So like just weird. My pastor would preach about, how if the country was being run the way it was supposed to be run, like under God's authority and everything, parents would have the legal right to stone their disobedient children. Like it was...
Your pastor said that from stage? Hey friends, welcome back to the Reasoned Reality Podcast. My name is Joe Smith. I am your host. Today I have got with me Margaret Bronson, and many of you may already know Margaret, but maybe not know her name. You might know her from the Deconstructing doulas. And I have invited Margaret on. We've talked many times, and I would consider her a friend. We invited her on because yesterday, as of this recording, like Sunday evening, there was supposed to be a documentary come out about the survivors of Doug Wilson, some of the survivors of Doug Wilson's cult. It got preempted because of weather stuff, and then we were going to talk about it, blah, 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 but we still wanted to do it because I still think it's important. So thank you for taking the time. I know, I don't know, I understand how emotional and just straining on your body all of this has been. So appreciate you taking the time today to come and talk with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I probably needed to talk to humans today.
Yeah, and I think everybody, especially like our listeners and people in our world, probably already saw like the clips that people were sharing and all of those things. And I know that yesterday in my sermon, I talked about the actual whatever, and then had people texting me that evening, wait, you said it was on at 8? I was like, yeah, it got preempted. We'll let everybody know. But I'm curious how that happened. Like, I know that you posted something about that, but for those people that maybe don't follow you, how did all of that take place? Like, how did CNN get a hold of you?
Yeah. So, rewind to like the second voting in of Trump, November 2024, I guess it was. There was like an awareness, my community is like, just like who he'd been aligning himself with, the direction MAGA had been going. We knew that our people were close. But then when on like almost the first thing he does, he appoints his cabinet and he picks Pete Hegseth. It was like, oh crap, like we're actually not overreacting, we're underreacting. And so I spent like from January to August trying to first educate people on who Doug Wilson was, why he's a problem, why it's not just a problem for like the survivors, but like now for the whole country and the connection. And there's like so much education. I think everyone thought I had like a tinfoil hat. They just couldn't see it. Doug made that a lot easier first in August when he starts calling himself like the pastor of Christian nationalism or whatever, plants a church in DC, I think in like April, that Pete Hegseth goes to and a lot of people on the Hill do. So there started to be articles coming out corroborating what I was saying. And then, he does this interview with Pam, and that was early August. And like my whole community kind of just shut down, just having to see his face on national television, feeling like the walls were closing in around us again. Like everyone, had to sacrifice so much, like their whole family, you know what I mean? Any sort of like financial or social stability, their sense of belonging and identity, to get away. And now not only is it feeling like he's, over them again, but like he has the American government or the United States government, on his side. And there's this whole document, Project 2025, that is basically saying like on a national level, we're going to reinstitute our childhoods that we ran away from and that we like weren't going to have children in, and we already have children. And now that's going to happen again. It was a very intense time. And so, I was like, I need to use this moment to, first of all, warn people, but secondly, and maybe most importantly, I don't like Doug Wilson ever being given a microphone. That's my like least favorite thing. I don't want more people exposed to his toxicity. But if we can take this opportunity and leverage it into support for survivors, which is the other thing I've been trying to do for the last bunch of months, was raise money to care for and support survivors. Because it's not just education. It's also, fleeing dangerous home situations and communities, and they don't have access to their own, they weren't allowed to work outside the home. So they don't have, credit history or a college degree, or their names aren't in the bank account or on the house or any of these things. And so there's just a lot that goes into the survivor care on our side. And so it's like, if he has to be on national television, I should make sure that we like both can warn people with this and also raise funds for survivors. And so I didn't know how to do that. Slept on it, woke up with an adrenaline rush at like 2:00 in the morning, went into my closet and filmed a reel to Pamela Brown, asking her to reach out to me because I wanted her to hear the other side of the story, not just Doug's side of the story, but those who have survived his communities. And it was maybe 2 weeks. Tons of people shared it. And Pam reached out. And from there, we made a plan for her to come to one of my retreats that I host for survivors. Not the actual retreat. We came in 2 days early, and filmed for 2 days with CNN. That was back in October. So it's been 4 months since we recorded. So the anxiety has just been like hanging over everyone's head for a long time, first preparing for it in October and then, waiting
And then it
for
was
it to
supposed to be
happen.
there. And then, just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and people like bought plane tickets to go be with people that they felt safe with for the watching, like there's a lot that goes into it. And I think for all of us, the body memories that are coming up are very much like we're about to get in trouble, like the shoe's about to drop, the hammer's about to fall, like all that kind of stuff. Because, for some of us for decades, we've been calling different things out and getting punished for it. And I genuinely think that this time is going to be different on a large scale, but there's still like the people that are like live in our communities, the family members who are going to reach out and want to let us know how unhappy they are. And it's just a lot, plus seeing yourself on television and reading comments online. And there's a lot that goes into it. And,
Yeah, and if there's one thing that we have learned recently or lately, last I don't know how many years, is that people online are super supportive and nice, and I mean just the worst, right? I mean the trolls love to come out when it's stuff like this, and then just add to, yeah,
yeah.
especially if it's female centered or queer centered or
Mm-hmm.
anybody non-white male centered, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I already know there's going to be a lot of us have nose rings. They're all going to talk about our nose rings and our tattoos because we're going to tick off the Theo bros, and they're like actually the worst keyboard warriors,
They are. They are.
So,
But
yeah.
anytime, I would just say this, I'll put this out there too, that lately I've stopped engaging with any of them. What I have done instead is just some sort of iteration of, that's a weird way to say that you're okay with pedophilia. Because, we have a pedophile president. Alleged, quote unquote, air quotes, right? Well, for those that don't quite know your story, like you alluded to it just then, right? But for those that don't know your story, let's jump into that for a second. So you grew up in one of these kinds of churches.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have talked about this before, so I know your story and how you got out, which I would love for you to tell here, because it's not funny, but I love how it happened.
It makes me
The
very
avenue,
happy.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the avenue, how it worked. So tell us about, what was it like growing up in these white nationalist churches?
Yeah. So one of the things that makes my story a little different is that I was not actually born into it. So I remember before I was like 8 or 9 as we start sliding into it. By the time we're at a church that's like fully indoctrinated into it, I'm 11. So I remember before, and my parents did a lot of the cult things, but like, for example, my dad always valued my voice and he always wanted me to write and he always wanted to hear what I had to say. So I think that's part of why I'm able to do the work that I do, because I did see the harm, I experienced it, but there's ways that it didn't affect me that it did affect my peers. So I always want to say, like, my story is not where all the smoking guns lie. You know what I mean? I like to talk more representationally because there are so many people whose stories must be heard, but they cannot tell them. They're not safe enough to tell them. I am.
Right.
So the church that I was at, it was like girls could only wear skirts and they needed to be well below the knee, shapeless, head coverings, all, unless you're like literally up in bed. Hair has to be up at all times. They weren't supposed to cut their hair. There's a lot of rules that my family never actually followed, but that was like the reality for these other girls. But our TV went away. Going to the library went away because there was too many books that we weren't supposed to read. We started getting our books directly from a catalog from Vision Forum, which was like the lifestyle catalog magazine for this whole world. The books were very limited. The one that everyone talks about is Elsie Dinsmore. It was this book that had gone out of publishing that was written by a woman who it's about a girl who lives on a plantation. She's on the enslaver side, and it's incredibly racist. It's grooming. It's pedophilic. It's horrible. It's so spiritually abusive. And there's like 28 books in the series. And it's like, you're always bad. You are always wrong. You always have to be perfect. And then she ends up marrying her dad's best friend, who's older than her dad, like significantly, who also tells her that he loved her from the first time he saw her when she was 7.
Oh, what?
These are like the only books, like the only fiction books that we really had access to when we were really little. So like just weird. My pastor would preach about, how if the country was being run the way it was supposed to be run, like under God's authority and everything, parents would have the legal right to stone their disobedient children. Like it was.
Your pastor said that from stage?
Yeah. Also, there was only 100 people in the church, and that's only 10 families because everyone had like 8 to 12 kids. Birth control wasn't allowed. Sermons were constantly talking about how wives can never deny their husbands. I remember a sermon that I actually went back and listened to it recently because I wanted to trigger myself. He talked about how women shouldn't even talk at all about anything other than the weather when they're inside the church building, because a man might overhear something they say and learn something from them, and that would bring like shame on the whole congregation. Also, they had family membership, so the head of the household would be the member. No one else was members. No one else got to like vote. Also, all of their wives did not vote.
Can we
like
pause that for a second?
America, yeah.
Can we pause there?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just sit here for just a moment. Number one, I want people to feel that, like in your bodies, like whatever emotion you're feeling, feel that deeply. But my question is, you're at this time, you're old enough to like actually have like real, thoughts, like internal struggles. I mean, you're hitting middle school age, and I'm sure some of these things took place later than just 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever ask your mom, what the hell? Like, how do you feel when the pastor says this about you? Did you ever ask her that?
Yeah, and it's very confusing in my mind and my mom's mind. We've tried talking about it.
Are they still there?
No, my parents, we got excommunicated when I was 16. Which was,
I do remember you telling me that. Yes.
So my mom was an educated woman. She was the nurse manager of the ICU of the Veterans Hospital of Philadelphia.
So she's successful, driven
Yeah,
person.
she stopped working to homeschool us, and then we weren't being able to make it on just my dad's income. So she went to like just working weekends. So she never fit the molds of this church because she always like half the time had a job. And that's part of it is she was working. So she wasn't there most Sundays because she was working weekends. So it was like mostly just my dad. Um,
I bet that was great.
yeah, it was rough.
Hey, honey, guess what the pastor talked about today? We should probably talk, babe.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And that's the other thing was all the sermons about courtship stuff and like the this whole thing about like daughters belonging to their fathers until they find a man to like give their daughters to, and like conversations about dowries. We all had hope chests. Just like the most antique looking chest you could find was going to be the one that like was the coolest. And you just start filling it with like baby clothes that you make for your future children, like dishes you collect, linens, like very like 1800s. Like,
if somebody wants to be a stay-at-home mom,
yeah.
right? Like my wife, when we first got married, up until my son was born, no, a little bit after my son was born. So he was like 3 years old. She worked in the corporate world and she hated it, hated it with a passion. She hated not being present. She hated missing stuff. And the job that she had didn't allow her to like take off and like go to, field trips and stuff with the kids. I did all of that. When we moved down to Florida, part of the stipulation was she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. She wanted to be there and do all of those things. And I fully supported it because that's what she wanted. Right?
Yep.
So if you want that stuff, great. But forcing that on somebody, especially starting at such young ages, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like, so one of the things that Doug Wilson in particular talks about is how boys need to be left alone. Like basically in parenting boys, the idea is to just like not edit them at all. Like let them be wild. Don't curb their aggression. Don't curb their anger, their wildness. Meanwhile, girls are supposed to be like, quiet and submissive and like laboring, like from the earliest ages, like 6, 7, 8 years old, they're cooking meals, they're sewing, they're caring for younger siblings. 8, 9 years old, they're waking up with their siblings in the middle of the night because their mom has two, like an infant and she's pregnant, that was not my reality because I only had one younger sibling, but that is a lot of my peers' reality. And because I didn't have younger siblings, I was encouraged to find a nannying job so that I could have experience working with a house and children, or I was going to be a crap wife and mother. I wasn't going to be marriageable. So I did. I nannied. Unfortunately for them, it was someone outside of the cult. And so I spent lots of time with people who helped me change my mind.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was.
We'll go back to just a second ago because like we got off on a little tangent there. What did your mom say to you when you would bring these things up that like, but mom, that's not you? And not throwing your mom under the bus because absolutely not throwing you under the bus because I wasn't raised to that extent, but when you're in the middle of it, everything you talk about is just the norm. Right. It's just how it is. So like even in my world that wasn't as right wing as yours, there were still nut job stuff talked from the stage. And when we talked about it, it just was. Until you saw better, you didn't know better. Right? So like I want to put that out there to make sure that people aren't like, well, her parents should know better. Yeah, they're victims too, man. Yeah. They're victims too.
100%. 100%. I think both my mom and my dad were really, really afraid of the world. So my mom was a missionary kid. So she'd grown up like on missions campuses all around the world and had just had like a very Christian, safe upbringing, didn't really interact with the world much. And I think, also I'm first generation American on her side. She was a missionary from Britain and actually came to America as a missionary. So she just had this like, third culture kid thing going on where I think she didn't feel like she fit in and there was some fear of the world. My dad grew up in Philadelphia, son of Irish immigrants, like was not born into whiteness and then kind of acquired whiteness throughout his life. But he was a vulnerable kid whose dad had just come, like he was born 10 months after his dad came back from the war. And so, his dad was like an alcoholic, didn't go to work. So his mom worked a lot. So he was a vulnerable kid without parental supervision walking around Philadelphia. He had firsthand experience with how dangerous the world could be. So that's where his fear of the world came from. And I think that really drove his desire to shield my brother and I from his childhood. Mm-hmm. So I think there's that on one end. And then both my mom and my dad were far too feminist in they hated that word. They thought it was bad. But like at the same time, in comparison to the people we were around, they educated me. They, really thought that it was important that I'd be able to think for myself and and they always wanted to know what I had to say about stuff. And so, my mom was always complaining about how the other women at church never had anything to talk about except for what they cooked that week. And she hated it. She wanted to talk about like real things. But at the same time, I think both of them were really drawn to the male headship thing. They were really drawn to male leadership. So it was like for them less about subjugating women and more about calling men to be providers. And again, think about my dad's background, right? Calling men to be providers. I think my mom romanticized her dad and his like kind of patriarchal missionary role that he had, and she wanted that. So I think it's complicated. So when I would ask,
it tends to be that way, right?
Yeah.
It tends to be that way. They're not dumb people.
That's the thing. Actually, a lot of these families, I won't say all or most, but like, because I don't have actual numbers. But a lot of the survivors I work with say their mom actually was the one that drove all of the culty stuff, like drove them into the cult, reinforced it, like their dads went along with their moms wanting the cult. So that's a really interesting, I think, thing that would surprise people. Is that women do choose this a lot. So when I would ask my mom questions like, what do you think about women not voting? Or, what do you think about this courtship thing? And her answers would tend to be things like, well, you can trust your dad and, your dad's a good leader and, it's right to, follow his lead and that kind of stuff. And, those answers were really confusing because I'd be like, but what if I didn't have a dad that I could trust? Or like, it's not a question of if I trust him, like, how does he know who I want to marry? I was terrified of marriage because I felt like I would not get to pick who I was going to marry. And that I like looked around at the options and I was like, ooh, I am scared. I would literally,
which makes sense.
I would literally like imagine in my mind, if I have to marry this person, could I make it? And like try to like, and I was like, panic attacks. So yeah, it very confusing.
Which I think that is one of the loopholes that people don't think about in things like, complementarian theology. And for those of you that aren't church nerds, that just means male headship. Men are in charge. I know families that operate that way within the church. And the husband just happens to be a very loving, sympathetic, empathetic man, right? Like in all other things, like I would say relatively healthy person, right? And so the way they operate really doesn't kind of fit that complementarian because he is healthy and is sympathetic and includes and they, but it only works that way if the guy just happens to be that way.
Right.
The vast majority do not.
I want to add 3 layers to that. So first is
Do
the
it.
class layer. Okay. So if you have a guy and he is a 3rd generation businessman and you put this responsibility on him, his nervous system's pretty chill, right? He's not anxious about how he's going to feed the kids. He's not overworked. He's not coming home with a ton of work stress because he's delegated it all off and he's playing golf, with people, like that kind of situation. Or, he's the pastor. He's kind of in control of everything. Or he's an elder and he's kind of in control of everything, right? And so their nervous systems are just lower. So there might be like intense control, but they're not like reactive. They're not like freaking out because their nervous systems are activated. But for those who are single-handedly trying to feed 10 children and, might not have a college degree at all, that's different. That's a different nervous system. 2 is an intense fixation on alcohol in these like CREC circles. Thankfully, I was on the Reformed Baptist side, so we did not touch. We had non-alcoholic grape juice we had alcohol removed wine for our communion at this church. But in like Doug's circles, the drinking is really intense. And so you add giving alcohol to people a lot, like constantly to all of this, those nervous systems, the behavior, they turn into alcoholics. It just, again, descends into domestic violence, control, aggression. And then the 3rd layer is just the weight that they put on these men. Patriarchy hurts everybody, right? But the weight of you are individually responsible for every single decision, not just your wife, but every single one of your children make. So that you have to watch everything they make. So the surveillance is really intense. And then they're literally deciding and dictating, everything about what you wear, what you watch, what you read, what you eat. And not only that, the messaging from the top is always coming hey, maybe we should try this hallelujah diet where we don't cook food because we want to eat like they ate in the garden. And we mostly only eat vegetables and we only eat raw vegetables and maybe an egg if you can't cut it, that kind of stuff, right? There's all this messaging constantly coming about how to do it better, how to have a family that's for sure going to go to heaven. And those men are carrying the weight of if I don't do my job good enough, my kids are going to end up in hell. Right.
Yeah.
And so for them, what it does is it twists, being controlling into being loving. That's how it's perceived. The more controlling you are, the more loving you are. Doug will say this. He will talk about fathers who are neglecting their family because they aren't being abusive. Essentially, they're not surveilling. They're not dictating. I remember the men talking about how, if dads let their kids go to public school or just watch normal movies or wear clothes that look kind of jeans and a t-shirt, that those fathers don't really love their children.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to that.
So it's very twisted.
I don't know what to say to that. I mean, listen, because I came from adjacent, right? It wasn't at all, but adjacent.
Right.
I
same
do
teaching,
understand.
Not the same application.
Yeah. Right. But I 100% understand that underlying fear of I've got to get my arms around these things because I don't want my children in hell. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that for my kids. I remember that. And I remember that for my parents. That's a legit worry that drives a fear. It's a fear-based narrative. And
Right.
so then, that drives a lot of stuff. So I 100% understand that. The application that you're talking about though is beyond the pale. That I can't wrap my mind around.
Yeah. And then an additional layer is the combat between the husband and wife. So a lot of the teaching is stuff sin wouldn't have entered the world if Eve had been under Adam's headship. And, Eve's the one that brought sin into the world. And so it's constantly, they're constantly painting women as less reliable than men, gullible, easily swayed by, false teachings.
Talking snakes.
Yeah.
Talking snakes.
So you want to also shelter and limit your wife's exposure to things that she might not be able to navigate and might lead her away. So there's like surveillance and control over what the wife is allowed to interact with. And then there's also hostility to her voice. Like, I remember people saying things like, if your wife says it, you should kind of assume it's wrong and she's trying to lead you astray. Like, it's actually dangerous to listen to your wife. I mean, Doug's book, Reforming Marriage, like all of his books that are like center around gender have this theme throughout.
I'm wondering, I know that we have freedom of religion in the United States, but at what point?
I've wondered that too.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I come from Pennsylvania, and William Penn was the only colonial founder who did not choose a state religion. It was a pluralist colony. So we had all of it. And I think that kind of was beautiful and wonderful. And William Penn's one of my heroes. But at the same time, I grew up there, 200 years later. And the amount of extremists that found safety in Pennsylvania, and then those religions just continued to get more extreme. And that's why that area of the country is just like so rife with wackos.
I know that this is good. I know that people that will listen to this will agree with what I'm saying. But ever since I left all of that behind, one of the things that I cannot put myself back into is how people will take these ancient books, these ancient stories that were written from a place of understanding, like a lack of understanding of how the world and how the cosmos and how the human mind or body actually work. And then they would take what was written by these humans and then say, this is how we're supposed to operate for all time and eternity, regardless of where we come from or what we learn. And then argue that vehemently, like that is rock solid. Like this is not going to change. And it's just like, you don't do that in any other area of life ever. You don't. Now, some cult members might, right? Like when it comes to medicine and stuff. I mean, we're seeing a rise in measles and all kinds of insanity. But you have a house with electricity. You presumably take, if you have high blood pressure, I'm sure you take your medication. You don't do that in any area of other area of life except for that. Yeah. And then pretend like that's God's design, whatever that means.
Well, and the reason that they're able to convince so many people to do that is twofold. One, they intentionally limit access to education, right? So we are not going to learn real history. We're just going to read our own curriculum, which, talks about how great the Crusaders and the Puritans were and pretty much just focuses on that kind of stuff, the Reformation, all that kind of stuff. And almost no access to science unless it's Ken Ham or, people like him.
Which means no
access to science.
Yeah.
All of my curriculum was written by people within this cult. And a lot of them, it was Doug Wilson's own publishing house, Canon. And so it was the economics, it was the civics, it was philosophy, it was worldview, it was apologetics, it was Bible, it was history, it was science, like literally everything. Logic and Latin. Everything is being filtered through the cult, and the cult is also constantly reinforcing that everyone other than them is not trustworthy and is actually trying to send you to hell. And if you listen to them, that's a great way to get your family on the path to hell. So everyone just lives in terror all the time. but they don't even recognize that that's the case. They don't even recognize that they're scared because they're surrounded by other people who are scared. So they think it's just normal. Like, that's just
It's normal.
That's just how people are. You're afraid of the wild animals outside your door. Obviously, all people would be, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Again, because I'm adjacent to that, I can remember a lot of those same fears. And us children, we all share the same fears of like being left behind or, all those hell, all of those things. We all felt that, like everybody did. So it was normal. Well, I don't want to spend all of our time and not talk about how you got out. And I know it's not a super long story, but I love it so much that your nerdiness opened the door for you to be able to leave, which just speaks to my, listen, I love that series too. So, can you tell us, like, how did you finally get out? Like, you mentioned the fact that you were excommunicated, but there were still things, right?
Yeah.
So how did you get out?
So first of all, I was a voracious reader and we had very limited books we could read. So I was reading, I read Chosen by God by R.C. Sproul at 10, and I fell in love with theology. So then I was reading Norm Geisler and Evidence That Demands a Verdict and all of the...
You were reading R.C. Sproul on...
I ran out of material.
You were at 10?
Yeah. And my brain was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Everything has a reason. There's an answer for everything. There's no mystery.
I was reading Batman and G.I. Joe comic books, Archie at 10.
Listen, it was a step up from the, CSA grooming material that I had before. So,
oh my God.
It got my brain working. And I went through a really intense Calvinist cage stage phase as a 12-year-old. But I also read Lord of the Rings right around 10, 11 years old. The movies were coming out, and it was like a pop culture thing that I was allowed to engage in because they're always trying to co-opt Tolkien and Lewis.
Yep. Yes.
Always. And so they didn't do a good enough job.
They understood. If only they knew what those guys actually believed.
Right.
They wouldn't.
They fought a whole war against fascism, Yeah. So I read it and obsessed. I was homeschooled, so I got to kind of pick what my projects were. Every project from then on out was about Lord of the Rings. I need to write a persuasive essay. It's going to be about Lord of the Rings. Character study is about Lord of the Rings. I think I wrote 8 different papers on finding God in Lord of the Rings. So I had another friend who was equally obsessed with Lord of the Rings. She was not in the cult, but she was homeschooled. So she was one of those friends that my parents raised an eyebrow out, but let happen. And she was like, oh, there's this forum. I didn't even know what a forum was. I barely knew what the internet was. There's this forum where people talk about Lord of the Rings and you should join it. So we made an email address for me and I got on this forum, and it was essentially we wrote fan fiction about Lord of the Rings. We played D&D set in Middle Earth, and then we talked about politics and literature and theology and all these things. But there's probably 70 people in the group, but they were all over the world. They were all different ages. It was European socialists and Europeans who've never had religion, they're from Belgium. They haven't had religion in 3 generations. And, a lot of homeschoolers and conservatives, but there was just all of this dialogue, right? And that is where I met my now husband. I immediately had a crush on him. I don't even totally understand why. It was just I just knew, which is crazy. But we started.
And your husband was a child at the time.
He was a child. That's always.
Yeah. We just want to put that out there, so nobody misunderstands.
He was a year and a half older than me. It was super kosher.
Yeah.
But he was a Southern Baptist pastor's kid, which is perfect for me because that felt safe enough that I engaged with him. But he started blowing my mind, giving me access to facts. And I was that doesn't fit with anything I've ever heard. And so over the years, we would send long emails to each other, long personal messages. Then we finally exchanged phone numbers, and I would wait till my parents were asleep and then take the family cell phone, go to the basement and like whisper behind the boiler and talk to him for hours, and then sneak back up to my bed before everyone woke up, and basically didn't sleep for like 3 years, but it's fine. Yeah. And so that's how I started like deconstructing in my mind. But, that took quite a bit of time, and he didn't know everything. So it was just little things, but it was opening a door that, I couldn't trust everything I'd been told. There was like other positions that were reasonable. But, okay, so we're talking about how women are treated and like the teaching around women. And I, as someone who really, really enjoyed learning and education and was like very curious, I really struggled with the women's stuff, but I also was such a goody two shoes, and I just wanted to be good. I just wanted to please God. I wanted to please the authorities in my life. And so I was like really walking this fine line. But what made it all make sense for me was that men are supposed to be protectors, right? So it's less about, trying to hurt women or women are bad. In my mind, it was that men are taking, like, they're the ones just standing in front, and the buck stops with them. You know what I mean? And so every year this network of homeschoolers and fundamentalist / theonomist Christians would have a banquet hosted by Vision Forum, Doug Phillips, in DC to celebrate the sinking of the Titanic. Because women and children first. They would call it like the Women and Children First banquet, and fathers and sons would go to it and basically like talk about how they're called to protect women and children. And so for me, I was like, I'm with the men who are going to keep us safe. Like, these men take keeping women and children safe really, really seriously. That's great. And if that means that we take a back seat so that they can do that, like, it kind of made sense in my brain. My brother and my dad go to another one of these banquets, come home, and a few weeks later, the second, so not our pastor, but the only other guy on staff, musician, stands up in front of the congregation for a special meeting after service to tell us about all the children that he had abused. He confessed in great detail. And I hadn't had any sex ed, so that kind of was my sex ed, was him talking about that. Yeah. So fun. So I'm just sitting there and I'm listening to him say all these things, and obviously, like, the shock, the horror, the grief. I mean, this was a man that I had talked to a lot. He'd had dinner at our house many times. We counted him a family friend. And it's just like, it was a lot. But I'm sitting there in the pew and I'm like, but it's going to be okay, because I know these men in my church. I know how seriously they take it, protecting women and children. This guy's gonna, like, I was like, they're gonna be as understanding and hopeful that he can heal and whatever, but like, they are going to protect us. They're gonna remove him from access and like whatever. And when he stopped talking, the pastor came up and put his arm around him and said, so here's what I need you all to know. God has forgiven him. He's confessed his sins. He told us everything, and he says he's not going to do it again. I'll be here making sure he doesn't. But God has forgiven him, and I have forgiven him, which means all of you have to forgive him. And if you don't, that means that you're setting yourself up as like being judge over God, and like not submitting to what God says, and saying that he was wrong to forgive this man. And basically it's idolatry. And specifically, what forgiveness looks like is forgetting. So I want you to basically forget everything that you heard. And I do not want any of how you interact with this man to change. If you already have him over to your family's house for dinner all the time, like, you need to keep doing that. If you already let your children sit on his lap, you need to keep doing that. And I'm pretty sure, like, I kind of blacked out at that point because it just didn't make sense. My parents, the other thing he said obviously was like, and don't call the cops. We're not going to involve the state. Church matters need to be handled within the church. It would be sinful for us to involve the world in what is a matter of faith. And so my parents did indeed call the cops. And that is why we were excommunicated.
Good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's where they kind of got frozen in time. They left, but then they just remained stuck. Like they got themselves physically out, but they never figured out what happened. It was like they just were paralyzed. My little brother was paralyzed. Like it was like, we've been part of this thing, we were part of that church for 5 years. But we'd been, listening to these kinds of ideas and teachers for probably about 10 years, at that point. And I just think it was too much to try and figure out where to start and who to listen to and how to figure it out. So all of the same teachings remained. Like courtship was still 100% what I was supposed to do. I was still supposed to wear skirts, all that kind of stuff. So at that point is when I started really talking to my now husband, David, like, what is truth? What's real? We started really like talking through different theologies and whatever. But yeah, so I didn't want to lose access to my parents. I love my parents. I felt responsible for them. I am an oldest daughter. And they were like so paralyzed at that point. I did not want to upset them or lose access to them. So I was like, okay, the only way out of all of this is marriage. So I know that I don't want to marry any other person that I've met up to this point, and I do want to marry you. And so we started putting together a plan of how he could come through the cult door, like look like the good little cult boy, meet all of the specifications. Being a pastor's kid helped. So he did. And that is how I got married at 19 and moved 1,500 miles away the next day and kind of left the cult behind and started my own life wearing shorts and t-shirts and watching. Oh my gosh. We watched 2 movies a night for like 3 years. Just trying to catch up. Like, because he kept saying things like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I felt so stupid and embarrassed all the time because I didn't know anything that anyone was talking about. So he got me caught up. And that is part of how I deconstructed, was through movies. Just like interacting with lots of ideas and, realities, like understanding what, a single mom's reality might look like, or, different minority groups or whatever.
So how did you end up from there? I know this is long and I don't want to keep you forever. I'm going to come on all your time and stuff. But how did the deconstructing duelist, how did the work start of you looking back and saying, there's still so many people there. I got out. I'm going to help them. Like, when did that begin?
Yeah. So I'm going to rapid fire say this. A whole bunch of other things happened. Like Doug Phillips, who was one of the big leaders, turns out he'd been sleeping with his nanny the whole time he was preaching about how,
Of course he was.
Underage nanny. Bill Gothard was another big name, and he'd been like, he sowed his seed. And there was like, but then even out, in like the normal, like SBC, PCA, different areas, there was all these pastors, and they just like, it was like 2 a year,
One right after the other.
Yeah. And it just starts falling, because I got married in 2010. So like 2010 to 2015, it was just like over and over and over and over again. Yeah. And I'm a pastor's wife at that point, because when I married David at 19, he was 20. He was already a pastor because, Southern Baptist.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So that's happening. And then so we were in the SBC, and we were there just in time for like the swell of the Young Restless Reformed movement. And at first it was very multicultural. It was like trying to be at first, right? Like they were.
Oh, I remember. I considered myself to be part of that when it first started. I loved Mark Driscoll and Matt Chandler. I listened to them multiple sermons a day.
They were
Even though I was an independent Christian church, but man, I loved them so much.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they like had like an urban focus. They had hip hop and rap, and they were all like could wear tattoos. And, there was, the Gospel Coalition at first was people discussing things and arguing about things and respecting each other's positions. At first, the Young Restless Reform movement was like kind of cool and kind of woke. And then those debates, one side started winning, and that was the only side. And if you weren't on that side, like you're not even a Christian, I don't think. And so the seminaries start getting taken over, and because the seminaries are taken over, these like young pastors move into community churches and completely change their culture. And so I'm watching that happen at our seminary. I'm watching that happen in our church. I'm hearing Doug Wilson's name again. People are talking about catechizing and getting rid of Sunday school and youth group because we need to have integrated family worship, where you have the kids with you during every service and you don't ever separate. Headship to a different degree. Should women talk, period? The same books that I was raised on, this like intense fascination with the Puritans. I'm like getting triggered every time I'm at church. And I wasn't brave, but I was reactive. And so I'd be like, no, blah, blah, and like talk about all the things. I remember one of the pastors was praising his wife because the most important thing with child rearing, they would say, and also the people I grew up with would say, is consistency. And so if you spank for something, one time, you always have to spank for it. There's never any grace. If you tell someone you're going to spank them, doesn't matter if they make excuses or explain it away, you still have to spank them, like consistency, right? And he was saying like, you have to win every battle. And so what that means is essentially to break the will every time. And he was saying that he was really proud of his wife for spanking their daughter 87 times in one day to win a battle. And I was like, I need to get out of here yesterday. Like this is, but it was David's job.
Poor baby.
It was our whole community. And also I loved the people in that church. And, we were doing the premarital counseling because we didn't trust anyone else to do premarital counseling. And basically we were giving them permission to like, not like, first of all, sex isn't supposed to hurt. If you don't have sex on the first night, that's okay. And actually probably really great because she's probably super sexually repressed and probably needs some time. Like that's like the place that we were in. We were trying to so I feel like deconstruction tools kind of starts back there when I was still in the SBC. And I'm like watching these messages come from my childhood. And I'm like, actually, no, was giving people permission to not do that stuff, trying to like fight the legalism is what I was calling it in my head back then. This creates a lot of rub between us and the senior pastor and like the rest of people, the other elders. And then my husband is disabled and chronically ill. And so we're going through all of that. But he goes into the hospital, almost dies. And 3 days later, the elders come and fire him for being too sick, which is like a really crappy cover story for the reality, which is I think that they wanted somebody who was going to be a better fit for them culturally. But their cover story was to go against the Americans with Disabilities Act, which actually doesn't apply to churches. So they actually didn't.
Yeah, people would be surprised at how many exemptions churches actually enjoy. They can pretty much do whatever they want. Yeah, they can pretty much do whatever they want and not get in trouble.
Yeah, so that was brutal. Like we lost everybody. We lost our home, and I was pregnant with our fourth kid. I had to completely change my birth plan. Like there's people who were going to be there when I gave birth to support me that weren't there. I was completely alone. Like it was just, you just lose everything. And David was still extremely sick, and I didn't know if he was going to make it through the year. It was really, really intense. And then he he was blacklisted. He couldn't find a job. I was hugely pregnant with a fourth child and like almost no work history. So I was having a hard time finding a job. Finally, his dad's friend was a senior pastor of a big SBC church in Missouri. They take him on as a youth pastor just in time for COVID to start and all that shenanigans. And we didn't agree with anything about any of that. And it was rough. And so we lasted there like 2 years. Our last day in pastoral ministry, so our first day free of pastoral ministry was July 4th, Independence Day. So that was special, 2022. But when COVID started, I started talking online. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was without community. I didn't have any friends. Everything was making less and less sense. Like, I didn't understand Christian support of Trump. I didn't understand, again, I still thought like the Young Restless Reform movement liked social justice because that's how it started. And I was just really confused. And so I just blabbed my mouth a lot. But what started happening was I started connecting with people because I started talking about Doug Wilson, I started connecting with his survivors. And then when we lost our pastoral ministry job in 2022 and I moved back in with my parents for 2 years, that's when I started hosting cohorts and retreats, because for like the 2 years previous to that, I had DMs filled with survivors messaging me like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anyone else talk about Doug Wilson. And then be like 3 maxed out DMs of story they'd never told anyone else. And I was like, I cannot be doing this. Like I was doing it like hours a day, responding to DMs. And I was like, I need to create a bucket for this that isn't in DMs and like actually is more effective. And so I started cohorts, which is these 12-week small groups where I basically create an environment and prompt a lot of discussion for people to work through what they went through. And then we also take some of the major indoctrination that happened and kind of like clip and tell the truth, to clip the stranglehold that some of these things have on them. Like, you have to read your Bible every day. That's, first of all, the performance, the level of performance, the hypervigilance, the shame. It's just like your brain is just running on this track and you're just like constantly re-triggering and re-traumatizing yourself because, you have, even if the cult leader's not in the room with you, you have a little cult leader that lives in your head. That's what indoctrination is. And so you might be alone with the Bible, but you're hearing their voices in your head and it's informing every single thing you read. And so, I would be like, God's the adult in this relationship. And so he will hold me fast. Like, you can let go and like get okay. He cares more about you being okay than you performing reading the Bible every day, which the Bible actually never tells us to do. Like, so it's just a very simple, like, actually that's not true. You get to not perform. You get to whatever. And that would create enough space for people to connect with their group and share like how they're actually feeling, how that's showing up in their body. So they're like coming to themselves, like awakening to themselves in community. And so that's pretty much the work I've been doing. Guided retreats, which brings like an embodied element to it. But yeah, that's kind of how it started.
So let me ask this real fast. How does that stuff get funded?
It doesn't. When my husband had... Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask because, let's say somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I love what's happening. How do I get involved? What do they do?
So for a long time, like my husband's a pastor. So I just was like, here's a suggested amount. A lot of people couldn't pay that. And I just scholarship them. And I just like wouldn't get paid. Now I'm the sole breadwinner for my family. My husband is waiting on disability, which is like really garbage. The disability system in this country is super garbage. You can't work until he gets approved. And we were told when we started that it was a 3-year wait. So that's so fun. But he's, already his health has made it really impossible for him to hold on to a job. So here we are. So right now we run on a donation basis. I don't have like a set fee for anything. I just ask that people pay what they can. And then I've spent the last year trying to fundraise. We have a GoFundMe. We are in the process of getting 501c3 status. If we had money for a lawyer, that would go faster.
That's not an easy process either. People don't know that. That's a really difficult process.
It is. And also Doge gutted all of the organizations that, so it's all slowed down. Also, they have like exclusions lists, like you can't have these words, and it's like female or woman or underserved or,
And here's the thing. You were not exaggerating. So I work part-time for a nonprofit organization, and we literally, at the end of last year, helped all of these nonprofits reword their stuff to take things out like that. Women.
Female.
Equity.
Yeah, equity, equal. I mean, it's like the list is actually insane. It's like, how do you communicate without using these words? So yeah, we are, I've tried connecting with churches. It's like, this is part of the thing. It's so difficult, right? Because I'm like, honestly, the closest thing that I am is a missionary. And so, but like that word is so loaded and triggering. And also like, I don't know that I would ever want to use that word at this point. Just because of the colonization and what that has like come to mean and everything. But also, I do need to get paid kind of the way they do. Like I need support for the work that I do. And it needs to not come from the people that I'm helping, because the people that I'm helping they're not allowed to work. They're, have 7 children. They, don't have access to their own bank account. Sometimes their wives are like, their husbands are like mega rich and they have no money. They're not allowed to spend money on their own. So yeah, we're trying to get grants, but also we just have like a volunteer grant writing team. It's just been hard. That's been the hardest part.
So if there are any people listening that are tied to anything like this, go talk to your leadership or email. We'll put all that in the show notes. Like we'll put your stuff in the show notes so people can contact you. Whether it's, to share a story or to inquire about things, or, hey, my church would like to da-da-da, or we would like to da-da-da. Like we'll have all that in the show notes.
Yeah. This is part of, so the CNN thing is supposed to serve so many different purposes in my mind, right? Like I wanted it to be loud enough that the people who are trapped inside actually can hear it. Because right now, people who are trapped inside these very Christian nationalist circles, their algorithm is not sending them messages from the outside. They're not listening to news from the outside. They don't have friends or family that they talk with from the outside. Like they have almost no infiltration from ideas outside of Christian nationalism. And so I wanted to get loud enough that they could hear us. And I wanted to talk to their Christianity and appeal to their love of Jesus. So like, despite the fact that the 5 of us on that couch that has been like shown a bunch of times, 2 are atheists, 2 are Christians, 1 is like Christian, but's not going to use the label. Like it's actually like a really beautiful spectrum of experience, right? All of us are preaching the gospel like the whole time. Because we're trying to appeal to the highly indoctrinated Christian nationalists and show them that you don't have to betray Jesus. You can leave. Like it's not a betrayal of Jesus to leave. But another piece,
a lot of times it may just be more faithful. Anyway, sorry, you keep going. I want to interrupt your train of thought.
So another piece is I've been like cold calling, ministry leaders, donors, organizations, pastors, and being like, hey, can I have a meeting with you? And then again, it's like all of this education before I can even ask for help, right? Who is Doug Wilson? Why is he a problem? Why is what he teach bad? What is the effect on survivors? Why is the need so great? Also, connection to the White House. And so they literally would look at me like I had 8 heads and I was just like this crazy person. CNN is part of like, I'm not lying, and they're showing you that everything I've been saying is true. And like, I genuinely need help. And not only that, like the number of survivors of this cult is only going to grow exponentially. And I think a lot of people are waking up right now in real time. They're going through the 5 stages of grief. There's people who are in denial, there's people who are in the anger stage. But like, they're all going to need access to like, not just leaving. We don't want them to just leave Christian nationalism. We want them to free their minds and their hearts and like have a life and be able to think for themselves and become productive members of society. Right. And so, and not just that, like we want to care for them. These people, some of them have been abused since birth and, manipulated and coerced into and weaponized, literally turned into weapons, because that's the whole thing about Christian nationalist theology is that it's constantly trying to remove your humanity and tell you that being human is bad and humans are bad, right? We want to give people their humanity back. So having the CNN doc pushed back was hard on multiple levels. It's hard for the survivors. It's also hard for like those of us who have been working without pay tirelessly for a long time. And we're hopeful that like we could have a healthy work-life balance, at some point. And, cause this work is really hard. It's a lot of dealing with abuse with no support. You're like gorging on your own triggers cause all of us are survivors ourselves. And we just are really looking for help and support to do this work. Not just financial, also like organizational and, just partners, a network that will, not see us as weird or a threat. Cause that's like what we get a lot.
That makes sense. So again, if you're out there listening to this or you happen to see a clip of this on social media, reach out. If you have those kinds of resources, whether they're, monetary or organizational or even just like you can put this person and this person in the same room together and create the connection. Man, that sometimes that's worth more than like somebody being able to write a one-time check, right?
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this or see a clip, man, do that. And if you have that, don't hesitate. Because I think you're right, Margaret. I think that it's just going to get worse.
It is.
Especially since it's growing and it's not slowing down. You've got Doug Wilson, but then you've also got like Dale Partridge and you've got Joel Webbin and you've got these guys that have
Toby Sumpter.
Really massive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I spend a lot of time like combating those kinds of things. And people will say things like, stop giving them the platform, stop, amplifying. I'm not. They already have it. It's there. It's you, just because you don't see it
right.
doesn't mean it's fringe. It's there. Like it's bigger than.
People keep saying.
It's just like, I'm not platforming them.
Yeah. People keep saying only a third of America supports this. And I'm like, a third of America?
That's a lot of people.
So many people. That's terrifying to think about.
It's a lot of people.
There's so many people. That's not.
Well, let's talk about. Yeah, think about that. You got a third of Americans running the country right now. Like everything we're experiencing is because 1/3 of the United States decided this is the way to go. And then, I mean, obviously the vast majority of people just was like, okay, whatever, didn't do anything. But that shows the power, like 1/3.
I'm hoping.
I live in the state of Florida and the stuff that's coming out of Florida this legislative session is the worst it's ever been. The worst.
Yep. We're seeing it real time here in Missouri. My friends in Texas are seeing it happen there.
Yeah, Missouri's not even better. That's where we're from. That's where my family is.
Yeah, it's bad here. Yeah, and then it's like, it's not even just the Christian nationalists, because then you have like Stephen Miller, there's just, but it's like, it's still the same ideas. And
it's the same. It's the same.
That's the thing I keep telling people, like, if we do not attack the Christian nationalist angle, like the immigration stuff's going to be a problem. The the Islamophobia is going to continue being a problem. The lack of caring for the poor, because they're the bootstraps people. Pull yourself by your bootstraps. If you're poor, it's because you're dumb. It's poor because you're bad, you made bad decisions. Stephen Miller wants to reduce our population by like 100,000 people. He doesn't care who or how. Like, this is crazy, but it's all supported by Christian nationalist beliefs. And so if we can attack the Christian nationalist angle, a lot of things could get better.
I totally agree. I work with a couple of groups here in the state of Florida. One of them is statewide, and I have had multiple discussions with them about the fact that y'all aren't speaking their language. Like you're speaking your people's language, which is, that's your primary goal, right? You want to engage with them. However, they're also trying to be strategic about building alliances, building coalitions, and, those things. And I've talked with several of the higher ups because I've got good relationships with them. But it's like, but you're not speaking their language.
Right.
They are never going to hear what you're saying if you don't understand where they're coming from. Like I went to the Capitol. It was 2 years ago that I went with a group, and I had one of the staffers for one of the state representatives talking about that they were going to reach out to all these pastors in their district, and they were going to, talk to them about, they need to get on board because they're going to be left behind and all these kinds of things. And I'm like, dude, you cannot say that to them. If you say that they are being left behind, that you're progressing forward or whatever the phrase was, you're reinforcing exactly what they're already saying. Of course they are. They believe they're the remnant.
Yep.
That's their job. And you're feeding it. Like, it blew me away that the level of, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, but just the level of ignorance in who they're dealing with and who they're talking to. 100%.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that Doug Wilson choosing to preach at the Pentagon might be the worst decision he ever made and the best for us, because so far I think he has flourished and been left alone to do what he does without much opposition, because people think he's so radical, he is, but that he's fringe and that he doesn't really matter. And it's actually like counterproductive to give him airtime and attention. That he's a troll and feeds off of attention. And it's like, actually, that's not what's been happening. Yeah. He's been trying to avoid attention, but now it's that hubris thing that always gets these people in the end, right? He thinks he actually has crossed some sort of threshold where he can now put himself out there in the light, and that he'll get the same kind of reception out here in the light than he got in the corners and in the shadows. And I want to call that bluff. I don't think that's the case.
No. Fascism always overreaches.
Mm-hmm.
Always overreaches. And I know the fact that I know for you and your survivors and stuff, the people you work with, I'm sure that just the sound of his voice,
his face,
is grating. It's just like, oh, yes, his face. But for me, all I was like, keep talking, bro. Keep talking. It's like Pam Bondi. Please show up every day and keep talking. Like, here's a microphone. Here, have more microphones. Because it's like they just can't help themselves.
Mm-mm.
Like, the more you talk, the worse it's going to get.
Yeah. And he he really thrives on people who are uneducated, right? So in that interview he did with Pamela Brown, she asks him, do you think men and women are equal? And he says, I think that's like such a crazy thing to ask. That's like saying, which is more important, the violin or the bow, And it's like, obviously, like, they're equally important. You need them both. And it's like, actually, let's just do a little thinking here. You can pluck a violin and it makes noise without needing a bow. It is actually like the voice of the instrument. A bow can't make any noise itself. And he says, they're actually the same instrument, right? That's what he says in the quote. It's like, so he's saying men are the violin and women are the bow. That actually, like, anyone with any intelligence sees through that as like, so you're basically saying women aren't real. Like, they're not actually real humans. They're just an appendage for men that men don't actually need. in order to like have a voice and speak, but it does, increase their range.
Ooh, that's good. And I argue this a lot. I think what it's an and also it's either or, and then we're going to wrap it up because I want to honor your time. But I think that one of the best things that ever happened was people having access to the Bible in a language that they understood, right? Because then you decentralized things. You took the power away from the Roman Catholic Church, the empire at that time. And also, one of the worst things that has happened is that people have wide access to these ancient scriptures they have no understanding of, and then can then be manipulated again. Because if you understood Hebrew and you understood the creation accounts, then you would also know that no, it doesn't say that God took a rib from Adam to create woman. He split humanity in half. That's the beauty of the story.
Yeah.
That's the poetic part of what that is as a poem. And no other place in Hebrew is that word used for a specific little tiny thing. It's half.
Yeah.
It means the entire side of it. So the imagery is the splitting of the two, and then the relationship is the coming back together of the two, right? So that's the poetry of the Hebrew creation account. But nobody knows that. Unless you go to school, unless you go to a good school,
Right.
or unless you have access, right? And they don't. You didn't.
Mm-mm.
Which is where then
We're made to be so afraid of books and voices and listening to people outside of our circle. Like the religious scrupulosity is one of the things that I still struggle with survivors. It takes months, if not years, of working with survivor to give them the confidence that they can navigate chewing meat and spitting bones, right? So what if it's a bad book? So what? You'll be able to tell, just constantly like telling them like they can trust themselves, they can navigate this, they can think for themselves. And also, you don't have to decide immediately upon finishing the book. You can read and keep reading and just keep reading. And then, by the end of reading, 20 books, you'll see, oh, these details have influenced how I think about this book. And like, oh, all of these books agree on this thing. That's probably likely to be true if all these different voices are, agreeing on this thing. But it is so like, this is the thing that I want people to understand. Deconstruction, we talk about it a lot. It's become its own industry. It's its own movement, right? But there's not good representation within the deconstruction movement for the survivors that I work with. Like a lot of deconstruction is, we're just like thinking through and changing our minds about things. The people that I work with have nervous system wounds intentionally put there by a cult to control them, right? So we're dealing with fears and like lizard brain stuff, not upstairs thinking stuff. And so, but not just that, you're not just deconstructing theology. It's not just like, oh, I don't know what I think about hell, or I'm not sure what I think about, marriage, right? It's like, I don't know how to have a relationship with someone because I've only ever had a relationship with an authority. And then if you're a peer, we're like mutually controlling and like watching over each other and like surveilling each other for the authority, right? Like we don't even know how to like interact as just humans again. I don't like within the cult, an anxious attachment or being anxious. First of all, like they say, if you like ask for help with it, it's sin. If you like claim anxiety, then you're a sinful person, but they actually want you anxious all the time about everything, about what food you eat, about, what somebody says, about the way you dress, about if you're good with God. They want you terrified about whether or not you're good with God all the time. And so it is so much work. I read 200 books a year for 10 years to deconstruct history, science, theology, politics, like everything. That is not reasonable. That's not reasonable to ask someone to do. But the people who are like all the way there in Christian nationalism, that's the level of work they have to do. We have got to make the bar of exiting this thing much lower. We have got to make it more attainable and reasonable. Like not everyone has the time, energy, IQ to do what I was able to do, right? somehow we have to pave the way. We need to make it safer and easier. We need to get them away from their family members who are going to punish them. We have to give them access to, safe home, secure job, income. Their health has to get under control first. Their nervous system and their trauma reactions have to get under control first before we start thinking about, what do you think about God? There's so much. And then in this climate with these politics, it's still like there's so much right now in your face headlines. I don't know what to think about this because I haven't done the work yet. We have to support people on like a personal, involved in their lives, caring for them kind of way to help them get out. Because it just runs so deep, for people coming out of these Christian nationalist circles.
Well said. That's a challenge. So I will say this again for the third time. If you're listening and you can do something, please reach out. Go to the show notes and reach out. Margaret, I feel like I could talk to you for another hour or so about this. And as a matter of fact, once we find out when the documentary airs, I'd love to have you back on. Maybe give it a little bit more time, but I'd love to have you back on to kind of an update, see what's changed, see if the documentary opens some doors, kind of deal. I'd love to have that conversation once that airs, and give you a little bit of time to kind of, because I'm sure once it airs, I'm sure things are going to start moving. Things will start happening that maybe you didn't anticipate.
We hope so.
And I don't want to. Right. Yes. Right. We all hope so. And I don't want to jump in there in the middle of that while it's all like hectic. I get it. But I will reach out and we'll do it again.
That'd be great.
First, thank you for taking the time to come on here. Second, thank you for being so courageous and sharing your story. I have seen the power of people sharing their stories and how your courage, somebody will borrow it, right? To be able to tell their story. And that's the power of the story. So thank you for doing that. And then thank you for not only your hard work, but the sacrifice it takes to do so. Before this conversation, I had another interview. And one of the things that I was saying to them that I think applies to this 100% is the fact that in any freedom movement that we experience, you have your leaders, you have your people that are out front, and they do great stuff. Like they're up there for a reason, right? But they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the myriad, the entire army of people behind them that so many history will never remember their name, right? They just will never remember their name. And they do it anyway, right? And I think that they're freaking heroes. Whether we remember them or not, like we stand on their shoulders. And I think that the work that y'all are doing, whether you get the recognition or not, is on that level.
Thank you.
So
and I want to
just want to encourage you guys so much
for speaking about these things from the pulpit and owning that this is the responsibility of the church to police the church, I really appreciate that, and just using, your voice and your platform to stand with survivors and stand against this weaponization of Christianity, whatever it is. I don't even know what to call it at this point. Thank you.
I don't know. Yeah, absolutely. Well, make sure that you check the show notes. And even if you're not in a position to donate or anything, go follow Deconstruction Doulas. Go follow Margaret. All of that will be in the show notes. Go check out what they're happening. And if nothing else, just share. Just share it. Just help spread awareness. Thank you all for following along. Friends, don't forget that you might be the only voice of reason that someone hears today. So please do not be afraid to use it. All right, everybody. Until next time.